My name is Julie, and I am 36 years old. I never thought my life would unravel so quietly, so insidiously, until one day I woke up and realized I had become invisible in my own marriage. The pain didn't come from one sudden blow, but from 1,000 small cuts delivered so gradually that by the time I recognized the damage, I was already bleeding out inside. I used to believe love could survive anything, that if you held on tight enough, if you sacrificed enough, if you endured enough, then it would find a way back to you. I clung to that belief long after it stopped being true. I clung to it when my husband and I sat silently at the kitchen table, two strangers sharing the same coffee, but not the same life. I clung to it when his eyes began to wander not toward other women, but toward some far-off horizon where I no longer existed. The truth is, our marriage had been dying for years before it finally collapsed. The distance began the day we realized we couldn't have children. At first, we tried everything: the appointments, the clinics, the tests, the endless roller coaster of hope and disappointment. Every month became a silent funeral for a child who never came. And when the grief became too heavy for me to carry, I set it down. But in doing so, I set him down too. I thought he understood. I thought he knew that my silence wasn't indifference, but survival. That pulling away wasn't rejection, but the only way I knew how to stop drowning. But to him, my retreat felt like abandonment, and instead of reaching for each other, we let the gulf between us widen. And then came my sister. She arrived on our doorstep, broken from her own failing marriage, dragging two kids and a storm of chaos behind her. I told myself it was temporary, just until she got back on her feet. But days became weeks, weeks became months, and soon my house didn't feel like mine anymore. Her loud voice, her sarcasm, her children's toys littering every corner of our lives, it was all too much. But I defended her anyway, because she was my sister, and because I thought maybe keeping her close would distract me from the emptiness in my own heart. I didn't notice how my husband was disappearing into the background. I didn't notice the way he clenched his jaw when she mocked him, or the way his shoulders sagged when I laughed along instead of standing by his side. I thought he would understand that family is messy, that this was temporary, that he would see my loyalty as proof of my strength. Instead, all he saw was betrayal. The night it all snapped was at a family barbecue. I hadn't even told him it was happening, I don't know why. Maybe because I had grown so used to not sharing things with him. Maybe because in some twisted way it didn't even occur to me to include him anymore. He came home to find our backyard filled with relatives, laughter spilling out into the evening air. He walked in like an outsider stepping into someone else's party, and before I could even reach him, my sister made her joke. "If you disappeared tomorrow, no one would even notice." The words were meant to be light-hearted, tossed into the air with a smirk, but they landed like a knife between his ribs. And then, like cowards, everyone laughed, even me. I didn't see his heart breaking in that moment. I didn't see the way the silence inside him hardened into resolve. I just saw him raise his glass and say, "Challenge accepted." I thought he was joking. We all did. But he wasn't. That night, when the laughter faded and the last of the guests had gone, he packed a bag. He didn't scream, he didn't slam doors, he didn't even leave a note at first. Just the divorce papers laid carefully on the kitchen counter with a yellow sticky note on top. "You noticed yet?" The cruelty of it didn't register until morning when I found them. I remember standing in the kitchen staring at those words and realizing with a sinking horror that he was gone. Really gone. I told myself it was just a tantrum, that he'd come back when he cooled off. But he didn't. He vanished like a ghost. At first I was furious. How dare he walk away without a fight? How dare he leave me with the wreckage, with my sister and her children and the house we had built together? I wrote him emails dripping with anger, calling him selfish, heartless, a coward. I told him he had no right to abandon me like that. I threatened court, demanded explanations, tried to wound him with words. But silence was the only reply I ever got. Weeks turned into months, and my fury began to collapse under the weight of loneliness. My sister, who had once filled the house with noise, left after the bills piled up and the tension snapped. I was left alone in the silence my husband had lived in for so long, and that silence became unbearable. For the first time, I saw what he had endured. I saw the weight he carried, the humiliation I had brushed off, the isolation I had forced on him. I started writing him again, but my words softened. I admitted the house was falling apart. The bank had begun sending foreclosure warnings. I was juggling 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. I told him I finally saw what he had been trying to tell me all along, that love isn't just about holding on, it's about standing beside someone when the storm hits. And I hadn't done that. The last message I wrote broke something in me. I admitted I was stupid, that I had taken him for granted, that I thought he'd always be there no matter how much I ignored him, and that I hadn't signed the divorce papers because foolishly I kept hoping he'd walk through the door one last time. I don't know if he ever read those words. I don't know if they reached him or if he deleted them without a glance. What I do know is that a year later I found him again. By accident, by fate, by sheer chance. And when I looked into his eyes, I knew. There was no coming back. I remember the exact moment my hope cracked open into finality. It was nearly a year since he vanished, and by some twist of fate, I found him again. I had heard whispers from an old friend, a sighting here and there, the kind of information that feels both like a gift and a curse. When I finally saw him standing outside that small coffee shop on the edge of town, my breath caught in my throat. He looked different. Leaner, quieter, his beard grown out, his posture lighter, as though the burden I had never lifted for him had finally slipped away once I was gone. When his eyes landed on me, there was no spark of recognition that meant love, no ache of longing, no urgency to close the distance. There was just calm. I broke down in front of him crying harder than I had in years, whispering apologies that spilled out too late. I told him I hadn't realized, that I wished I had listened, that I should have defended him when my sister mocked him, that I should have chosen us when I still had the chance. He didn't argue, didn't raise his voice, didn't even turn cold. He just stood there, quiet as always, until my sobs slowed. Then he spoke words I will never forget. "I'll come back, but only to end this the right way. I'll sign what needs signing. We'll wrap it up like adults. But I can't be your husband again, not after everything." There was no venom in his tone, no cruelty, just finality. The calm certainty of someone who had carried the weight long enough and decided to set it down forever. I nodded because what else could I do? The fight I had once taken for granted was gone from him, and there was nothing left in me to chase it. I walked away that day with a hollow ache in my chest, one that still hasn't fully healed. I thought love was eternal. I thought it was unconditional. But what I learned is that love can wither in silence, and no matter how much one person carries it, cannot survive when the other has already checked out. In the quiet that followed, I began to see things differently. I saw how often I had silenced him with excuses. "She's my sister. Don't be harsh. You're too sensitive. Can't you take a joke?" I saw how I let him be humiliated in his own home, laughed at in front of family, dismissed when all he wanted was to be heard. I thought he was strong enough to endure it, that my neglect wouldn't break him. I was wrong. Strength doesn't mean infinite tolerance. Even the strongest hearts eventually walk away when they're starved of love. After he left the house no longer felt like a home. Every corner carried an echo of him. The kitchen counter where I found the divorce papers. The bedroom where I once let my sister and her children sleep while he wandered the house like a guest. The backyard where that cruel joke sealed our fate. Each space whispered the truth I had turned our marriage into a place where he no longer belonged. The irony is that I only saw his worth in his absence. The silence he left behind was louder than any argument, sharper than any goodbye. And when I finally realized what I had lost, it was too late to reclaim it. He had already built a new life out of the pieces I had discarded. Sometimes I wonder what might have happened if I had chosen differently, if I had stood by him when my sister mocked him, if I had asked how he was feeling instead of assuming he'd be fine. If I had reached for him in those long nights when grief over our childlessness weighed us down. Would love have survived? Would he have stayed? Or were we doomed from the start? Two people clinging to the dream of a family, until the dream itself broke us apart. I'll never know. What I do know is this betrayal doesn't always come from grand affairs or violent arguments. Sometimes betrayal is quieter. It's the moment you laugh at someone's pain instead of standing beside them. It's defending the wrong person because it's easier than facing the truth. It's letting the person you vowed to love feel like a stranger in their own home. And the revenge, if you want to call it that, isn't always a dramatic act of vengeance. Sometimes revenge is as simple as leaving. Sometimes it's vanishing into the night with nothing but a duffel bag and a sticky note, and letting the one who overlooked you finally see the cost of their blindness. He never came back. Not for me, not for us. He came back only to close the chapter, to sign the final papers, to put an end to what we once were. And though I wanted to beg, to plead, to promise I'd change, I knew it would be useless. He had already given me years of his patience. He had already waited for me to see him. He had already endured enough. Now, when I sit alone in the house we once shared, I think about the lesson buried in the ruins of our marriage. Love cannot survive on one person's effort alone. Respect cannot exist if one voice is constantly silenced. And a heart will not stay where it is mocked, dismissed, and taken for granted. I tell this story not for pity, but as a confession, a caution. If you are loved, see it. If you are respected, honor it. Don't wait until silence swallows what laughter once was. Because sometimes when the person you took for granted finally disappears, they won't come back, not for forgiveness, not for reconciliation, not even for closure. They'll come back only to end it, and you'll be left with nothing but echoes and regret. That is what I live with now. After he signed the papers, there was a strange emptiness in me that no amount of anger, grief, or even apology could fill. Watching his hand glide across the page smooth and steady was like watching the last bridge between us burn to ash. He didn't tremble, didn't pause, didn't falter. The decision had been made long before the ink dried, and I realized I was the only one still standing in the ruins clutching at smoke. The silence after he left the lawyer's office was deafening. I drove home alone, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Every streetlight blurred into the next glowing halos through my tears. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the house loomed in front of me like a stranger's home. The walls that had once sheltered our laughter, our arguments, our whispered late-night dreams now felt cold and unwelcoming. Inside, everything seemed to scream of him. His favorite mug still sat in the cabinet, the one with the chipped handle I had always teased him about. The dent in the couch cushion where he used to sit still seemed to hold the memory of his weight. The faint scent of his cologne lingered on the old jacket he left behind, tucked into the back of the closet like a ghost refusing to leave. I curled up on the floor of our bedroom that night, clutching that jacket, and cried until my throat was raw. The kind of crying that isn't just sadness, but punishment. A punishment I knew I deserved. Because no matter how many ways I tried to twist the story, no matter how much I wanted to blame my sister, my family, or even him, the truth was plain. I had failed him, and I had failed myself too. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. Life didn't stop just because my marriage had ended. The bills still arrived. The bank still sent warnings. The house too big for one person felt like it was caving in on me. I picked up extra shifts, worked long hours, and stumbled home to empty rooms that echoed louder than any noise. In the quiet, I replayed everything. Every joke I had laughed at when my sister mocked him. Every moment I had brushed off his feelings because I didn't want to face the discomfort of defending him. Every dinner we ate in silence, me retreating into myself, him waiting for me to notice his loneliness. I saw it all so clearly now, as though someone had pulled back the veil I had lived under for years. Sometimes late at night, I would scroll through old photos on my phone. There we were, smiling at the beach, our arms around each other, faces lit by the glow of a setting sun. There we were, huddled together in the rain, laughing at our soaked clothes. There we were, younger, brighter, holding each other as though the world couldn't touch us. I would trace his face with my finger on the screen and whisper, "I'm sorry," even though I knew he'd never hear it. The world outside didn't stop to comfort me. Friends moved on, family drifted. Even my sister, whose careless joke had been the spark that lit the fire, eventually left to rebuild her own life. She apologized once quietly when she realized the damage she had helped cause. But her apology didn't bring him back. And I couldn't even fully blame her because I had been the one who chose to laugh with her instead of standing beside my husband. That betrayal, the one I committed, is what I live with now. Sometimes I think about fate. about how some people believe things happen for a reason, that we're given exactly what we're meant to endure. If that's true, then maybe my punishment is this living every day with the knowledge that I had love in my hands and let it slip through my fingers. Maybe my karma is waking up every morning to silence the kind he endured for years and finally understanding just how loud that silence can be. There are days when I catch myself searching for him in crowds, scanning faces at grocery stores, glancing twice at strangers in coffee shops. A part of me still hopes foolishly that one day he'll turn, see me, and soften. That maybe, just maybe, he'll give me one last chance. But deep down, I know the truth. He's gone. Not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually, in every way that matters. He left long before he packed his bag. He left the moment I chose not to see him. The cruelest part of all of this is that I still love him. Maybe more now than I ever did when we were together. It's an aching, desperate love, the kind that feels more like mourning than joy. And maybe that's what it will always be, me mourning the life I lost, the man I pushed away, the love I didn't protect when it mattered most. I share this story with you not because I want your pity, but because I want you to learn from my mistakes. If you are with someone, truly with them, don't let the little things pile up until they become walls too high to climb. Don't laugh at their pain to fit in with others. Don't let your silence speak louder than your love. Defend them, cherish them, stand by them. Because once they're gone, no amount of regret will bring them back. I thought love was about endurance, about holding on no matter what. But love isn't just holding on, it's reaching across the distance even when it's uncomfortable. It's choosing your partner over the easy laugh, the safe silence, the temptation to turn away. It's standing up when no one else will. I didn't do that, and that is why I lost him. Now I walk through my life carrying that truth like a stone in my chest, heavy, unyielding, permanent. And if you take anything from my story, let it be this: don't wait until the silence swallows everything. Don't wait until you're clutching a jacket in an empty house. Don't wait until the person you love is just a memory you replay on your phone. See them now. Choose them now, before it's too late. Because once they disappear, sometimes they're gone forever. The days after the divorce became a blur of routines I could no longer recognize as my own. I'd wake up to the shrill buzz of my alarm, drag myself out of bed, and shuffle into the kitchen, where the silence pressed against me like a weight. There was no clatter of dishes, no half-hearted small talk over coffee, no sound of footsteps pacing as he checked his phone. Just me, the hollow echo of an empty house, and the gnawing realization that this was the life I had chosen by default. I used to believe regret was a fleeting thing, sharp, painful, but quick to pass. Now I know regret can be a living creature, one that takes root inside you and grows, wrapping its vines around every thought, every breath. It shows up in the smallest things: the way the sunlight hits the corner of the dining room where he used to sit, the sight of two toothbrushes in the bathroom drawer, one of them still his, the faint scratch on the wall near the hallway where he once leaned too hard, moving a box, laughing at his own clumsiness. Each detail is a reminder whispering you had love, and you let it rot. I started staying later at work just to avoid coming home. The office lights, the hum of the printer, even the smell of stale coffee became my companions. At least there no one asked why my eyes looked swollen or why my wedding ring was missing. People assumed I was busy, dedicated, maybe even successful. They didn't know I was hiding from the ruins of a life I had demolished with my own negligence. When I did come home, I would sometimes pour a glass of wine and sit on the floor of our bedroom, staring at the closet where his things used to hang. My sister had once filled that space with her noise, her chaos, her laughter at his expense. She's gone now, rebuilding her own life somewhere else, and I'm left with the bitter irony of silence I once wished for. Now I'd give anything to hear his voice, even if it was angry, even if it was broken. But that's the thing about silence: it doesn't negotiate, it doesn't bend, it just reminds you of everything you've lost. One night, I found myself digging through old boxes, searching for something I couldn't quite name. Inside, I uncovered the photo album we'd built together in our early years. The first page was our wedding day, me, in my white dress, him, with that nervous smile he tried to hide behind humor. Then vacations, birthdays, Christmas mornings, where we laughed as we burned pancakes. Page after page, the faces staring back at me looked like strangers, younger and lighter, untouched by the years of disappointment that would follow. I clutched that album to my chest and whispered through tears, "Why didn't I fight for you?" It was a question with no answer, just a hollow echo bouncing off the walls of an empty house. The truth is, I didn't lose him overnight. I lost him slowly, piece by piece, in every moment I chose others over him. Silence over words, dismissal over compassion. My betrayal wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, steady, relentless. And by the time I realized what I had done, there was nothing left to save. The cruelest twist came months later when I heard through mutual friends that he was doing well. More than well, he was thriving. He had moved to another city, started a new job, and even bought a small house. They said he seemed lighter, freer, like a man who had finally stepped out from under a shadow. That shadow had been me. I should have felt happy for him, but instead it gutted me, because it proved that the problem had never been him. It had been me all along. I tried reaching out one last time. I sent a letter handwritten, pouring every ounce of truth onto the page. I told him I was sorry that I finally saw him, that I finally understood the pain I had ignored. I told him I still loved him, that I always would, that I would spend the rest of my life regretting the ways I failed him. I slipped the envelope into the mailbox with shaking hands and prayed it would reach him, that maybe it would open some small crack in the wall he had built around his heart. Weeks passed, no reply. The letter might as well have been dropped into the ocean. Maybe he never read it. Maybe he burned it. Or maybe he read every word and simply closed the book on us forever. I'll never know. What I do know is that I became a ghost in my own life. Friends stopped inviting me out. Family stopped checking in. My sister, whose chaos had once filled my home, moved on and never looked back. I was left in the ruins, haunted by memories I couldn't escape. And in that loneliness, I learned the hardest lesson of my life. You can't take love for granted. You can't assume someone will endure endless neglect and humiliation without breaking. You can't laugh at their pain and expect them to stay. Because even the quietest hearts eventually walk away. And when they do, the silence they leave behind is louder than anything you've ever known. I used to think the worst kind of pain was loud, the screaming matches, the slammed doors, the words you can't take back once they've left your lips. But I learned that the deepest pain isn't loud at all. It's quiet. It's waking up at 3 in the morning and rolling over to find an empty side of the bed. It's walking through the grocery store and reaching for 2 of everything before realizing you're only buying for 1. It's hearing a joke or a story you know he would have laughed at, then realizing there's no one to share it with anymore. The silence after him became a living thing in the house. It seeped into the walls, into my bones, into the very rhythm of my days. I filled it with distractions, television running in the background, music blaring, podcasts playing while I cooked. But no matter how much noise I created, there was always that undercurrent of quiet whispering the truth: he is gone because of you. My decline wasn't sudden. It was slow, like a candle burning down to nothing. I stopped caring about the little things. The dishes piled up in the sink, laundry gathered in corners. I let mail go unopened because I couldn't bear to face more bills, more reminders of a life collapsing under my inattention. I started avoiding mirrors because I couldn't stand the woman staring back at me, a woman who looked older, harder, lonelier than she should have at 36. Sometimes at night I would walk into the backyard and stand in the exact spot where the joke had been made, where my sister's words had shattered the fragile glass of our marriage. If you disappeared tomorrow, no one would even notice. I replayed it over and over, the way we all laughed, the way I laughed. And then I would picture his face, that split-second flicker of hurt before he covered it with a smirk and raised his glass. I hadn't seen it then. I hadn't wanted to see it. But now it haunted me. It was in those moments that I realized betrayal doesn't always come from grand acts of cruelty. Sometimes betrayal is a smile at the wrong time, a laugh, when someone needed you to defend them, silence, when someone begged you without words to stand up for them. My betrayal had been so small, so casual, and yet it had destroyed us. There was one night about a year after the divorce when the loneliness finally broke me. I was sitting at the kitchen table surrounded by unopened mail and cold coffee when the weight of it all came crashing down. I pressed my face into my hands and sobbed, not the quiet tears I'd grown used to, but violent heaving sobs that shook my body. I cried for the life I lost, for the man I had loved, for the woman I had been before bitterness and neglect hollowed me out. Through my tears, I whispered into the empty room, I see you now. I hear you now. I'm sorry. Words too late spoken to a ghost. But even in that breakdown, there was clarity. A brutal, unflinching clarity that stripped away every excuse I had built. I couldn't blame my sister. I couldn't blame circumstance. I couldn't even blame him. The truth was mine to carry, and it was this: I had been given love steady and patient, and I had squandered it. The next morning I forced myself to open the windows. I let the sunlight in, let the air move through the stale house. I picked up the dishes, I folded the laundry. I started slowly to take responsibility for the life I still had, even if it wasn't the one I wanted. I began journaling, pouring out my thoughts onto paper, not because it would change the past, but because I needed to face it. Every entry was a confession: the times I didn't speak up, the moments I chose silence, the years I let love wither instead of nurturing it. It hurt, but it was honest. And honesty was something I had denied him for too long. I don't know if redemption is possible for me. Some mistakes are too heavy to erase. But I do know this: his absence taught me more than his presence ever could. He taught me that love isn't about endurance, it's about participation. That respect isn't about grand gestures, but about small, everyday choices. That silence can kill a relationship faster than any storm. And maybe, just maybe, by telling my story, I can keep someone else from making the same mistake. Maybe another wife will hear this and choose to defend her husband instead of laughing at his pain. Maybe another couple will bridge the silence before it grows into a canyon. Maybe someone will realize that love is fragile and that it demands tending, or it will slip away before you even realize it's gone. I lost him forever. That's my punishment, my karma, my truth. But maybe my loss can be someone else's warning. There's a strange kind of stillness that settles into your bones when you've lived with regret long enough. At first, it was sharp, like shards of glass inside me, cutting me every time I moved, every time I thought about him. But over time, the pain dulled into something heavier. It became like carrying stones in my chest, always there, weighing me down, making it hard to breathe, but familiar in its permanence. I learned to live with the silence, but I never grew used to it. I filled my days with work, with chores, with errands that had no real urgency, because anything was better than being still long enough to hear the echoes of what I lost. And yet, every night when I lay down, the truth came crawling back into my bed. I had loved a good man, and I had let him slip away. Sometimes I dream of him. In my dreams, he isn't angry, he isn't bitter, he's just distant. I call out his name, but he keeps walking as though he doesn't hear me. I run after him, my legs burning, but the distance only grows. I always wake up breathless, clutching the sheets, whispering into the darkness, "Please, just once more." But the room never answers back. I see other couples sometimes at the park and grocery stores, sitting across from each other in little cafes. They argue playfully about what brand of pasta to buy, or they laugh about something silly, and I feel that ache deep inside me. Not jealousy, not quite, it's more like mourning. Mourning the life I could have had if I had simply chosen differently, if I had been braver, kinder, more present. My sister called me a few months ago. She said she was sorry again, that she never meant her joke to be the match that lit the fire. I told her I forgave her because in the end, it wasn't really her fault. The match might have started the flame, but the wood was already dry, the air already thick with the smoke of a marriage I had been letting burn for years. I was the one who didn't pour water when I still had the chance. And maybe that's the hardest truth I've had to accept. Sometimes love doesn't end with betrayal or cruelty from the other person. Sometimes it ends because you failed to see the one who was right beside you, waiting, hoping, hurting. Sometimes you are the reason it all falls apart. If I could go back, I'd do everything differently. I'd tell him I loved him every single day. I'd defend him when others mocked him, no matter who they were. I'd choose him over my pride, over my silence, over the easy way out. I'd sit with him in the silence and ask the questions I was too afraid to ask. I'd hold his hand through the storms instead of retreating into myself. But life doesn't give us rewinds. It only gives us consequences. And mine is to walk forward without him carrying the lesson I learned too late. So here I am telling my story to you. Because maybe it will matter to someone. Maybe you'll hear my voice and think twice before brushing off your partner's feelings. Maybe you'll reach across the table when silence grows heavy. Maybe you'll remember that laughter at someone's expense can cut deeper than you realize. Love isn't invincible. It isn't endless. It's fragile and it requires care. Neglect it and it will wither. Mock it and it will crumble. Ignore it and it will leave. My husband disappeared from my life, not because he stopped loving me, but because I stopped showing him I loved him. That is my betrayal. That is my karma. And this is my warning if you are lucky enough to have someone who stands by you, don't wait until they vanish to notice them. Don't wait until you're sitting alone in an empty house clutching memories like ashes in your hands. Choose them now. Defend them now. Love them now. Because once they're gone, sometimes they are gone forever. If my story touched something inside you, I hope you'll take a moment to reflect. And if you want to hear more stories like mine, stories of love, betrayal, regret, and lessons learned, please like this video. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to the channel and leave me a comment below. Your words matter more than you know, and maybe together we can remind each other to see the love we still have before it's too late.